But seashell radio is basically going to be earbud, which Luke, you got over your ears. Adam tends to have them around his ears. Not at all.
Hez does not have a pair. I find pairs.
You just find random pairs?
I clean them off, but I don't have a pair myself.
You sure you clean them off?
Yeah.
Positive.
Spit
Okay.
shot.
I was concerned.
I don't want to get an ear infection.
Besides the fact that Millie's wearing them all the time, what would be significance about her wearing them? Just going beyond, well, she always has them, but why is that going to be important within context happening within the book? What does it say about Millie? What does it say about acceptance of folks wearing them all the time within the book? Why make such a big deal about them all the time?
Because I got them in all the time.
I'm not trying to trap you. Is that good or bad? Okay. Anyone argue Own Little World's a good place? Okay. So it all depends upon context. If you're at work, probably not a good time. If you're trying to concentrate, study for something, might not be a bad thing.
It seems like she doesn't like to interact with people.
What's up? Middle word in the first line.
Own Little World.
I thought they said like.
And then she does not like to interact with people. My New Year's resolution was going to be neater handwriting. It did not work. Tommy, do you like interacting with people?
Do I?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why?
You get to know people better.
How's that benefit you?
But
Like, why do you like getting to know people?
That's a fun time.
Okay. Wider variety.
more friends.
More friends. More birthday presents.
More gifts.
Anyone not like interacting with other people?
Okay. I don't want no new friends.
Where you work? We'll get to the no new friends thing here in a minute. Customers, employees, fellow employees, mostly customers.
There's some real like real.
So it's dealing with the demand, always wanting something. This isn't right. I need more sauce. This isn't the sauce that I wanted. This is the total. Can you throw in some extra little whatever the case may be? Okay.
Well, I hate talking to the girls I work with.
It's whenever they like pull up and they like scream into like the sticker. They're like happy.
For like the drive-through.
Yeah.
Okay, so it just kind of turns you away from it right away. You don't want any new friends?
Nope.
Why not?
Because I don't like people. All my friends I've been friends with since third grade. So fifth grade.
Still friends?
Nope. I agree with that because
If you change in like a good way, then more people are gonna try to become friends with you. But
you
just
want people
because
riding your
like
wave.
say you become like start making a lot of money.
Okay.
And you make a lot of money and then people want to become friends with you because you have a lot of nice things and you make a lot of money. Then you can tell which friends are fake and which ones are real because if you went from broke to rich and you kept the same friends, then you got everyone friends.
Okay, so if
The
you
only exception is like females.
if you interact, how did I know you were going to go that route?
Well, I mean that's for
Whatever you
everyone.
got.
If you interact with more people, you're saying there's a greater chance of people maybe trying to take advantage of you then. Okay. At the risk, and Tommy says that he likes to interact with people, that you could find good people, good friends that could be beneficial for you down the
So
road.
you could. I don't want no more friends.
So like
It could be-
interacting with people is different than friends, you know?
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
It's
No,
like-
and just because you interact with someone doesn't necessarily mean you're going to become a friend. Don't take this the wrong way. You and I interact all the time. What's the chances of you and me being friends?
I'm
Yeah.
talking about we're definitely friends, Mr. King.
No, we're not.
We're friends. We're friends in here. More friendly to each other, but like if
Yeah, we're not friends,
Like,
but
we
we're
probably
friendly.
wouldn't go get something to eat.
No, no, not happening.
Take you to Applebee's, Mr. Candle.
Not at all. Chick-fil-A and we can yell in the loudspeaker.
I don't even know if that's allowed. Is it? Teachers.
Yeah, what if you want to date a teacher? What if you're a senior?
Actually,
Yeah.
it is.
Yeah, definitely not allowed for
It's
that.
definitely allowed to hang out with them. Like,
What whole interaction? Oh yeah, no, it wouldn't be quote unquote professional, necessarily appropriate. Yeah, you and I go out to Applebee's after basketball games tonight or something like that. If you became my babysitter for the kids your senior year because I'm no longer teaching you, then yeah, that I don't think that
or
would
like
necessarily
my
be
mom,
an issue.
like my mom is friends with Miss Pascalugas, so like I'm always with her.
Yeah, there's certainly a different dynamic with it. Me and Tommy, Applebee's,
Good chance.
not happening. Now, so this whole interaction, and there's certainly a difference, as you said, between being friends and interacting with people. What makes this a big deal? That we're talking about Millie wearing the seashell radios, and she is around her husband the whole entire time. Now you're talking about a situation where you would have a couple where you would expect there to be interaction. And this, of course, kind of leads in here into number 40 with their marriage. Why do people ultimately get married? Well, you would like to think that you have folks getting married. Marriage equals happiness / love. In the case of the Montagues, there seems to be some disconnect between those two things, where I think you do kind of ask the question, why are they married in the first place? And we don't really know the answer. I didn't hear what you said. Yeah. You could look at it from a negative viewpoint would be she wants more TV screens and she needs her husband with the salary to be able to get more TV screens. It could be something as simple as it's an action where rather getting married because you want to, do they simply get married because they are quote unquote supposed to, versus actually wanting to be married. Certainly there are some aspects of society where you're supposed to look a certain way. He's a fireman, he's basically a public official, he's an extension of the government, so he's probably supposed to have a viewpoint or a look where he's filling in the responsibilities that would be expected of him, and that marriage could be an aspect of it. But what issue ends up taking place is if you don't have any kind of interaction with people, if you're in your own little world all the time, it looks like what happiness ends up becoming is an isolated individual just by yourself as opposed to being able to interact with folks. Jaquez maybe doesn't want any more friends, but if you were to strip away all of the friends from him, that's probably not going to be a good situation. I don't really like to interact with people. You folks are okay.
Yeah, but you're a teacher. How does that make any sense? That's kids, though.
It's different than adults.
Yeah.
We're going out to dinner with friends on Saturday. I don't really want to go. I'd rather stay home. I'd rather hang out with my kids, play Legos. But instead, we'll be going out for dinner. I'll nod. You won't be there.
Great father.
Tommy won't be there.
You're gonna have to interact with people at night.
Yeah, well.
Yeah, that's fine. I don't know.
It's like a
There's
school event, though.
And there's certain, and I think, everyone, you do have different quote unquote lives or personalities. I think you act differently around friends, you act differently around family, you act differently around work.
I kind of don't.
It's,
Mr. Kane actually won't be there.
you can in some ways.
I really don't act different.
If,
I act different around my
and,
family.
and like for this situation, I don't consider this, for me, this isn't like interacting with people. We're talking about a book, I'm teaching class, this is something that I've been doing for like 15, 16 years. It's not anything that I have to think about. I know who you are, you know who I am, it's not a big deal. The people that we're going out for dinner with, I know who they are, but there's not a, I don't know, responsibility that I feel that I need to connect with them. I do have a responsibility to connect with Devin in some manner so that he can do well, in class, get his A, move on to college, become a millionaire, so I become one of his friends that he helps out later in life.
Well, Well, he should help
after
out.
Luke sucker punches.
I only act different at school. Like, hating the classroom.
Well, and I bet as lives change, I think there's going to be more arenas that you're in where you kind of start to kind of change and adapt with,
Yeah.
with as well as, you know, employment and even like family members. You know, you act differently
Yeah,
maybe
like my
around,
grandma.
you know, a grandparent as opposed to a cousin, an aunt, uncle that you're close with, as opposed to this is a cousin that I have that I've never really met before and I
Yeah.
don't really know. But what Millie does, what it seems like everyone within this society does, that whole interaction, it's not even happening within the marriage, it's not happening with children, it's solely with yourself or with those whole TV walls. I can say I don't want to interact with people tonight. That doesn't mean I'm not going to interact with my own children. That doesn't mean I'm not going to interact with my wife or parent, you know, my mother and things like that. But there's one thing with being a private person, there's a whole other thing with being an isolated person. And it does get a little scary when you watch people walking down the hall and having a conversation where there's not any eye contact between any of them, and it's strictly, you know, staring at the screen, earbud. It kind of starts to get like a Millie Seashell watching her TV all the time, and that gets to be a little scary.
I hate watching TV.
There's nothing good on anymore.
I watch one show, one thing.
I like the house hunting shows. I want a tiny house.
Yeah, me too. I don't want a big house. I'll be scared like if there's someone in there, like they creep up on me. I want the nice car though. I want the Lambo.
You want a lot of things.
Maserati. I don't want a nice car.
How about this visit? Page 50. Why is Beatty come to visit him? Okay, guy calls off sick. And so Beatty therefore comes by to visit. Certainly I think his calling off sick is kind of like a cover for it. I've called off sick before. I've never had a boss show up and go, hey, you okay? Assuming it's a one-day thing. If you have a prolonged absence where you're out for a week or so, yes, then people will kind of start checking up on you. He calls off sick, hardly ever calls off, but this is a one-time thing. That day that he calls off, Beatty first shows up. So what would Beatty's true intention be with this whole entire visit?
Catch him in the act of something. Catch him in the act of reading.
Visit him.
Criminal intentions.
Nope, she's just visiting.
Oh yeah, and like his wife.
Oh, well, yeah.
Finish the sentence. Beatty suspects Guy
He's reading.
has books, is reading.
Suspect. No, not.
He's trying to incriminate my boy.
And of course, the answer to this is we know that he does have books, and he's keeping them behind his pillow when Beatty comes in to visit. Talked about names a little bit with Guy, you know, kind of being just a regular guy. It could be an everyman kind of character. Beatty. What's bait?
Bait.
Bait.
Like, to catch. To catch something.
So you have like fish
To
bait,
attract something.
or you could put bait out for like a
Bear.
mouse trap,
Bear.
something like that. Bear. I don't want the bears coming by me.
You could though.
I'll put that bait out in the neighbor's yard. What's bait as a verb? It's similar to lure something.
Yeah, to
Um,
attract.
And yeah, it's still the same idea. The idea of putting bait out, you are still baiting something by placing out the bait. If you put the cheese in the mouse trap, you're still baiting the mouse. Beatty. Why does Beatty, not the spelling of it because it's different, that the spelling of the bait we're talking about is B-A-I-T, but Beatty, what does he essentially try to do with Guy all throughout the course of the book? I think that use of the word lure is a good thing, where he is trying to lure him in and ultimately wants him to do what? Confess. And he certainly sets it up to him. We're going, you know, everybody gets the itch from time to time to read. It's natural for firemen. They oftentimes want to just take a book and look through it. That's fine. They can bring the book in. We can throw it in the incinerator together. It's not going to be an issue. It's once and forgotten. It's good for people to understand what they're reading or why they have to go through the process of burning all the books. But he certainly seems to be a person who wants to try to lure Guy in and kind of bait him into some type of confession, where you have again that foreshadowing taking place where he is doing everything it seems to that he can in order to get Guy to admit to having books. If Guy were to go, I got a book, yes, there's a possibility that he would say, that's fine, no problem. You can turn it in, within 24 hours and all will be forgotten. You seem to get the sense, though, that if in this society, firemen, their job is to start fires at all times. If he were to go, I have a book, house would be in flames, jail time would be coming up, life would completely be taken away. So Guy is now kind of in a situation where he has to decide, is this something that I'm going to try to maintain secrecy, looking at the books, reading them, discovering them, or am I better off giving myself up? In a typical situation where you have husband and wife in the home together, what would be a reason for a Guy to give up the books and admit his wrongdoing? Save the family, keep them from getting harmed. If you have a situation like we have here where Millie, there's lack of interaction, there doesn't seem to be any true love, emotion, that issue doesn't really seem to be maybe something that could sway you. And if there were a time where a person might try to do a little bit more of an individual act, this might be the situation for it. Because it seems as if the people that he cares about either no longer care for him, they have no idea when they met, they've been married for 10 years, those details are important. Person that he seems to be developing a connection with, Clarice, she is now gone, and we could certainly think that maybe Beatty has something to do with it. So he could kind of be out on his own because he's not going to be risking anyone that he truly seems to love anymore. But that's a whole conflict now that's going to be taking place that we're going to be looking at with 2 and 3. I didn't give anybody number 11, but let's take a look at page 65. Towards the end of part 1. This is like a 200,000 bonus point.
Lay it on me.
You could pass for the year.
What page?
65.
Any more assignments? $260.
Yeah,
I had a college professor that did give out $100,000 or 100,000 bonus point assignment. Not dollar.
Did you do it?
No.
What was it?
The other girl, some other girl in class did.
What was it?
I never saw her again.
She did.
It was like a scavenger hunt, but you had to literally go places. It was.
She never came to class again.
I
Hey,
never saw her
Hey.
again.
it might have been worth it, honestly.
She's a millionaire.
Yeah, what's her name?
No.
I would have done that.
Mr. Kane.
Are you gonna remember my name from 20 years from now?
No. Page 65.
He's gonna forget next year.
The front door voice faded at last. There was a silence. Montauk felt the presence of someone beyond the door, waiting, listening. Then the footsteps going away down the walk and over the lawn. Footsteps being at this point, since they have the books out within the house, not human footsteps, but
Dog.
but the mechanical hound is probably around. Let's see what this is, said Montauk. He spoke the words haltingly and with such a terrible self-consciousness. He read a dozen pages here or there and came at last to this, quote, and this is what you have on your sheet. It is computed that 11,000 persons have at several times suffered death rather than submit to break their eggs at the smaller end. Mildred sat across the hall from him. What does it mean? It doesn't mean anything. The captain was right. Here now, said Montauk. We'll start over again at the beginning. Bradbury did not come up with the phrase, it is computed that 11,000 persons have several times suffered death rather than submit to break their eggs at the smaller end. 200,000 bonus points.
You're asking to do it?
Anyone know where that comes from?
Can you give us a time frame? Say it again.
It's on page 65, it's on your sheet. It is computed that 11,000 persons have several times suffered death rather than submit to break their eggs at the smaller end.
Give us a time
In life.
frame.
In, not Shakespeare.
Hitler.
How's an egg shaped? What do we mean when something is egg-shaped?
Not
That
sure.
looks like Logan's head.
Oh my god.
That's not even a good egg.
What is that?
Not a good egg.
What is that?
Eggs tend to have, you have the bottom part and you have a top part. Bottom part is a little bit wider than the top. According to the phrase here, what happens with how you break your eggs? It is computed that 11,000 persons have several times suffered death rather than submit to break their eggs at the smaller end. So you have 11,000 people, because they refuse to break their eggs at the top part, they have therefore died.
Stupidest thing.
Whereas if
Well, like you said, it's one was supposed to happen.
Nicholas is not going to break his egg at the top, he's going to break his egg at the bottom part, that's what he's going to do. Whereas if he did break it at the smaller end, he would be spared. If your life is in the balance, and it all depends on how you crack your eggs, if you were to crack it at the top part and be saved, would you do that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I probably would.
I
I'm
do
not
like
gonna-
that.
I'm not gonna worry about it too much.
You're not gonna be able to.
Ichiban, where he runs up and sets it down sideways.
This
and
phrase makes total
nonsense.
nonsense. It's silly. It's stupid. It's about the book that it's coming from. Actually, it was a movie a couple of years ago, which I didn't see. I don't know if it was any good or not. It's written by a guy named Jonathan Swift. He's a writer. He's a satirist. So he writes about things and then exaggerates it. My juniors read an article by Swift earlier in the month where he proposed that people should sell their babies for food within the first year. It would make them useful.
Nice. That's all I'm
It helps save with population and things like that. He was not being serious with it. He was not being serious at all. This comes from a book, Gulliver's Travels. It's a satire where a guy travels around and sees a whole bunch of different places, and you have like lands of small people and giants and all that kind of stuff. In one of the places that he visits, there is a civil war that is taking place. People are literally dying because of how they crack their eggs. So it makes nonsense that people would suffer for breaking their eggs. Within Bradbury's book, it makes no sense that people should die
So isn't that plagiarism?
for doing what? Not breaking eggs, but for owning, reading a book. So he's purposely taking this passage that is dealing with how nonsensical a civil war can be. I mean, a serious one can be nonsensical, let alone one like this. And he's kind of connecting it back. Now, the problem with it is you have to understand what that allusion is. He's not plagiarizing because he's just making an allusion to it. He's quoting the book. People will recognize that. Same thing as with when the woman holds up the match and says about, Master Ridley and we're going to be a candle to light the world. He's quoting something that's happened before. But he's taking something that is nonsensical to emphasize how nonsensical this whole world is that the book's taking place in. Last one, The Hearth and the Salamander, meaning of the title. That was your title for part one. Hearth, you remember we had as a vocabulary word. Hearth is essentially a fireplace, fire. The connotation of hearth is kind of like cozy, comfortable, warm. But the world that they live in is anything but. The salamander, I mentioned to you, real creature, but the mythical qualities of the salamander is it can survive fire. That's the symbol for the fire company itself. So you have a conflict between the happy home and the harsh realities of the fire department 451. The one that you're reading now, part 2, for your title with that one, you have the sieve in the sand. A sieve is you probably have one in a sandbox. It's like a strainer. So if you had, the plastic sand or the plastic thing where you could put the sand in and you could shake it and the sand would come out and the rocks would stay on the top or something, that would be a sieve. So think about the significance of sieve. He is going to have a passage where he mentions it, pretty clearly. We'll certainly take a look at that as being a focus point. Reading checklist, study guide, for Monday. You probably won't have to half of a